Welcome, and we're going to go into the share screen and then a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Ooh, that's large print there. Okay, so we're going to do the Rashi on the hay, on verse hay, and the reason is that so basically God had given these blessings, was stating these blessings, including possession of the land of Canaan, to Isaac, and the reason was because Abraham, right, listened to my voice, guarded my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my teachings. So Rashi is going to explain all this circumlocution here, right? This repetition of various words, because presumably they have different denotations, and that's why the Torah uses them. Otherwise, they're just simply synonyms for laws. I mean, they are, but they are a little bit more directed than that. So, Shama Avraham Bekoli, Abraham listened to my voice, Keshe Nisiti Oto, or Nisiti Oto, when I tested him. Interesting, right? Making that connection right there, that being tested, the temptation, of course, would be to not listen and not to take up the test, but that Abraham was willing to be tested by God. That's the implication of Abraham listened to my voice. Vayishmor mishmarti. Okay, so Rashi explains that the mishmarti, guarding, right, gzerot, edicts, right, leharchaka, to put yourself far away, to avoid al hazarot sheba Torah, regarding the prohibitions that were in the Torah. So this has to do with what the rabbis do to a great extent when they talk about building a fence around the Torah. That's how we understand a mishmar. So just as a fence guards and protects, so mishmarti, that which protects. And he gives an example, kagon shniyot la'arayot. So, for example, if the Torah, this means the specific arayot means the incestuous relations. Shniyot is, for example, if it says that a man cannot cohabit with his mother, it also means grandmother and beyond. In other words, so we know that legally one can look at words very literally and say, well, if it isn't mentioned, then it's not, it's not included in the prohibition. But this is an example of where the rabbis give you the shniyot. So the next generation down, even though the Torah doesn't actually explicitly forbid that next generation down or up. Ushvut la Shabbat. So this is interesting, perhaps a little more practical for our needs, right? Shvut has to do with laws that are not explicitly forbidden in the Torah, but regarding Shabbat. Right? We know that with Shabbat there are many prohibitions. So, for example, Shvut has to do with things like going swimming on Shabbos. Is in fact swimming on Shabbat permissible, even though it doesn't forbid you to do it? And there are many things that would be considered Shavut. Now, whether Shavut includes specifically, issues such as muktzah. I'm not certain whether muktzah is a separate category from Shavut, because not going swimming isn't the same as not touching candles or not let's say, handling screwdrivers on Shabbos
or a pencil.
Yeah, exactly. Even if your intention is not to write with a pencil, but just to move it.
Out of the way, yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, when it comes to muktzah, in some cases, if you need the place where that muktzah item is occupying, you can remove it. You may want to, the permission may involve doing it in a different kind of way, not simply taking it, but say brushing it aside or doing it in an unusual way, which would be a way of recognizing the fact that you're doing it on Shabbat. so that it's a recognition of Shabbat. At any rate, I think Shvut is a different category. I'm sorry I can't give you other examples, but we're saying that this would suggest in the Torah that Abraham not only observed the mitzvot even before the Torah was given, but he also observed things like Shvut and like Muktzah, and there is in fact discussion about that, whether we should assume that Abraham observed it or didn't observe it.
So where does the fences analogy come in, though? You said that they built fences. So where did that come in?
That was done by the rabbis. There are many laws that are of rabbinic origin. So we have once you start to get into Judaism and study the tradition, you realize that so we have a concept called deoraita, meaning that it's forbidden explicitly in the Torah or logically in the Torah. There are various ways to draw inferences from the Torah, which are considered logical inferences, and because they're logical, it's as if the Torah were stating it explicitly. That's all considered deoraita. However, there are also laws that are not explicit and not drawn implicitly from the Torah that the rabbis also added, and those are known as derabbanan. So you have deoraita, which is scripture, and a large category of prohibitions that are of rabbinic nature. And that's the building the fence around the Torah. That the rabbis were concerned that if in fact you did these particular things that they are forbidding you to do, you'd wind up actually violating laws of Torah.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay. Okay, so I think we have to look very seriously if they were wise or if they weren't, because frankly, I think laws of Torah are now violated left and right, without any question. The Torah is not concerned.
Example, Rabbi, I can't remember, Irv or something. They put a wire around the shuls around there so you can carry your baby or walk to shul.
Right, that was the Eruv, okay? That is actually a way in which the rabbis tried to find a permissibility for things. It's a whole complicated area. That is the theory behind it. I'm not an expert in it. I could go into a deeper explanation of it. It has to do with carrying on Shabbat. Carrying on the Shabbat is actually discussed in the Torah in connection with the manna, because the Israelites are told not to go out on the Shabbat to collect the manna, and they would have been going out from the private domain into the public domain to collect the manna and then bring it back into the private domain. So the whole idea of transferring objects on Shabbat, and there are actually 4 domains. And I believe I would go on a line to say one of those domains, called a Carmelite, was actually rabbinic. Okay, that there are essentially 3 domains that the Torah could define. One is the public domain, one is the private domain, and then there is the exempt domain, one which is neither private nor public, but considered exempt. And the rabbis took that particular exempt domain and created a domain which has characteristics of both those things, that isn't strictly public nor strictly private, but basically called that a Carmelite, and essentially put all the strictures of the private and public domain on that Carmelite. So because it looks so much like one of those domains, and if people saw you carrying or transferring into a Carmelite or in a Carmelite, they would think it's okay to do in a public domain or a private domain. So that's to give you some extent. So they also said that essentially that if you create a boundary that is recognizable, people will understand that it's a private domain. And carrying is permissible within a private domain. It is not permissible in a public domain. And I'm probably giving you a lot more information than you really wanted. So I should have followed my own advice. There we go. All right. Let's keep going. Mitzvotai, my commandments. Here we go. Dvarim she'ilu lo nichtavu re'uyim heim lehitztavot. So he says those commandments that even if they weren't written in the Torah, it would make sense to follow them. they would be fitting to have been commanded in the first place. Gives an example, kagon gezel, for example, theft, so that even if the Torah didn't explicitly tell you not to steal, it is, of course, a very basic foundation of human civilization. V'shvichut damim, shedding blood, murder. Okay, so even it was not necessary for the Torah to write them. It makes total sense as human beings to follow such commandments, and of course we know people who don't follow those commandments. But nevertheless, society would start to fall apart if these kinds of things went on constantly. All right,
Yeah,
and
you should wait till Sunday to murder and rob people.
that's right. There we go. Yep. That's right. Or maybe what's it, January 6th? Was that it? I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Chukotai, my statutes. Dvarim, this is so cute. The way Rashi puts it is, I mean, he's basically quoting, right, or referring back to rabbinic material. That's what Rashi does for us, right? He takes this vast encyclopedia of rabbinic material and interpretation and puts them at our right in front of us. Anyway, he says things, dvarim sheyetzer hara, that the evil inclination, ve'umot ha'olam, or the nations of the world, in other words, the pagans, meshivin alehem, they argue with these particular statutes, right? It's either within your own yetzer hara that says, oh no, this isn't something I should have to do. It doesn't make any sense, right? Kashrut, Shabbos. So your yetzer, it's too expensive. Kashrut, it's too expensive. Shabbos, well, that's for the best shopping day, or that's the best day definitely for to what do they call it? I'm sorry, I am totally blocking. When you take stuff, garage sales, Saturday, best day. Okay, the umot haolam, non-Jews, in other words, essentially. And again, you have to be careful about these sorts of statements. But anyway, they react to them. Okay, so here we go. Kagon achilal chazir. For example, eating pigs, or levishat shatnez, or shatnez. So Rashi's telling us that kashrut, not being forbidden to eat a pig, isn't a health violation. It's not a mitzvah. It's a chok. Okay, and wearing mixtures of linen and wool. These aren't health laws, okay? She'ein tam ba'davar. There's no reason for this. There's no intrinsic reason for these particular prohibitions. Ella, however, gzeirat hamelech. These are simply, right, the king's decrees, the chukotav al avadav, and his edicts regarding his servants. And the best explanation, of course, I've tried to give a lot of thought to these kinds of mitzvahs and why they are given. And the conclusion that I've reached, the best reason I can give, is they are ways for us to demonstrate to God our love. That you do them, why? Because he said so. That's it. No questions asked, and the very essential definition of loving someone is wanting to please them. If you and I realize there is such a thing as tough love, but I'm talking essentially that pleasing a person is very much a way of demonstrating love to them, and that is the reason why we have these things. With Shabbat, it's a little bit more complicated because I actually think it is so spiritually regenerating. But again, why look at how Shabbat is violated left and right, and the reason for that is again because it's essentially a chok. Kashrut for sure. Kashrut for sure. Torotai, right? My teachings. And he says, Lahavi Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is to include the oral law, halacha leMoshe miSinai. This has to do with a category of oral law, and I need to explain oral law if I've never done that or you've never really discussed this particular category. Halacha leMoshe miSinai means laws. For example, there are laws regarding shechita, right? How animals are slaughtered. And none of those details are given in the Torah itself, and nor are they derived logically by the hermeneutic principles, the logical principles, and yet they are considered halacha. They're considered um, part of the corpus of mitzvot, not simply customs, but mitzvot, meaning they are a response to divine commandment, and they're called halacha leMoshe miSinai. That concept, literally, it means a law back to Moses at Sinai. So I think that's more a description of their um, authenticity and their importance, more than literally saying it goes back to Moses, but that's a way of saying it's part of Torah. So the concept of oral law, okay, has to do, the best way, the shortest answer I could give has to do with the comparison of written law to oral law. And some of you have heard me say this already, certainly more than the fingers on my hand. But what generates the Torah, the written Torah, is, Lauren, should I give you the drum roll?
You mean doing what doesn't come naturally?
Precisely.
And the other one
Yes.
is circumstances alter cases.
Correct. That the oral law is there because we know there's a difference, for example, between theoretical mathematics or any theory and applied mathematics. That dealing with reality throws all kinds of interesting considerations of circumstantial nature that you simply cannot anticipate when you're thinking something through theoretically. And so the oral Torah, it has the status of written Torah, of the Torah itself, of Deoraita. Oral Torah is Deoraita. We should not confuse oral Torah with the Gzerot, with the Derabanan. They're not the same. Oral Torah has the legal status, so to speak, of written Torah. It is part of written Torah. It's just that the nature of it is different than written Torah. So I can give you an example, because there are actually examples in the Torah itself, that is in our 5 books of Moses. And one of the best examples that comes to mind for me is that there's a law regarding that original Pesach that the Israelites observed in Egypt, where they are told very clearly to consume the entire Pesach offering. They're told that that each family should get a lamb, but if the lamb is too small, they should increase the number of people. In other words, there should be various. This actually has feelings of oral law to it, where even though the law is each family to a lamb, well, what if the family's too small? Circumstance. So the Torah says explicitly, you can subscribe to the lamb. So different families, maybe unrelated to each other, are allowed to subscribe together so that the whole lamb is consumed. So the Torah is obviously very concerned about the lamb being entirely consumed, and that none of it be left over to the next day. And after having said all of that, the Torah goes on to say, and if there's some that is left over, another circumstance. Stuff happens. Some of the lamb is left over. It says you're to burn it. So it deals, that is the nature of oral law. And I could say something, I think I could use a metaphor. I don't believe that this is original by any means, but that what the oral law does is it brings the Torah in heaven. And because it deals with circumstances, it brings that Torah down from heaven to earth. That is how powerful the oral law actually is. Why was it called oral law? Because over many centuries, it was never written down. It was intentionally taught and memorized, and strictly speaking, an oral was kept in that particular condition. But what happened was around the year 200, somewhere there, the Romans were occupying that land, the land of Judea, and they were forbidding the study of Torah. And so the head of the community, Yehuda HaNasi, Judah the prince, decided that circumstances altered cases, And in fact, there was a need to write this down because the circumstance was such that since they were forbidding the study of Torah at point of death, they were killing people who studied Torah because it was clearly helping to give the Jewish people a unique identity, and they didn't want that. They wanted to unify their empire, and so Yehuda HaNasi decided it needed to be written down, and we have that in the Mishnah today. The Mishnah survives to this day. The Mishnah itself is written more like notes that a speaker would use to remind them of various things. And the Talmud itself is the explication of the Mishnah, of the abbreviated material. But essentially, this particular exercise allowed Judaism to survive. It would never have survived otherwise. So, so this is Torah tie, that Abraham followed these things. So again, we can take this sort of stuff very, very literally, or we can understand the point that the Torah is trying to make here. How being this defines what it is to act as a Jewish person. To devote one's life in this particular way. And of course, we keep saying twice a day, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And that's another way of putting it right here. Okay. Do you want me to pause here, or should I plunge on into Sheni?
Go on.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Vayeshev Yitzchak beGerar. Isaac settled in Gerar. You remember that the reason why he was in Gerar was that there was a famine in the land of Canaan at the time. Isaac had thought to go down to Egypt. He was going down by way of the country of the Philistines, and God told him not to go any further, not to go down to Egypt, but just to stay there. Remember? And that he would be okay, that God would take care of him, and that he'd be okay, despite the famine. So we're told, very simply, Torah, very short sentence, Isaac remained in Gerar. Let me see if there's anything here. Okay, nope, onwards we go. Okay, yep. Just making sure. Vayish'alu anshe hamakom leishto. So this is interesting, right? What happened with Abraham was that he went out to Egypt, and he was concerned, of course, that they were going to think that Sarah was his wife, and she was very beautiful, and that they'd kill him. So here we have a parallel story, right? That the people of the place asked regarding his wife. They were making inquiries regarding his wife. And so
Doesn't Isaac mimic Abraham, his father, the same way?
He
travels all over like Abraham, and he
right.
does the same thing with his wife.
Okay, so be patient, Padawan. It says right here, Vayomer Achoti, and he said, she is my sister. Now, there are cultures. Okay, so was he lying? So yeah, she wasn't his blood relative. She wasn't, that is to say, from one of his parents. But there are definitely societies where you talk about a cousin or a close relation like that as your sister. Okay, I mean that's a word you use. I'm not necessarily saying that it's not the whole truth, right? But it is at least somewhat the truth. But it goes on to say, because he was fearful to say, Ishti, my wife, explicitly my wife, pen yaharguni anshe hamakom, lest the people of the place kill me, al Rivka, regarding Rivka. Why? Ki tovat mar'eh hi, for she was beautiful. And so it is the parallel. Exactly. It is the parallel. With Abraham, technically, Sarah was his sister. It was for a different reason. We discussed it back there, and he explains it. And it had through Levirate, I believe, through a Levirate situation. But here, simply she was his relative. And he didn't want to say the whole truth. Here we go. So Rashi simply, I simply went ahead and translated it without sort of going into the mechanics of the Hebrew here. Rashi is not going to ignore that. He is going to be very careful. It occurs to me that one reason why Rashi goes into these grammar technical explanations is that, remember, if I'm correct, and that what prompted Rashi to do this was the predations of the missionaries on the Jewish community, and the fact that the Jewish community was ignorant, they weren't able to respond, and the missionaries, some of them were Jews who had become Christians and were learned Jews, and might in fact translate the Hebrew in a different way. So Rashi is very careful about grammar and issues of translation, so that there's an answer to those particular arguments that support missionizing activity. So, for example, just as one example, the word Elohim, singular or plural? The word
Sounds
Elohim.
plural. It
Pardon?
sounds plural.
It does. It sounds plural. And so the missionaries, that I think to this day, where missionizing goes on like this, because when I was in school in South Africa, I would hear these kinds of things, okay? They would say, well, you see, it's plural. What does that prove? The Trinity, right? Well, so Rashi points out that the verb that's associated with that term Elohim is actually masculine, it's third person singular. So if the subject was in fact plural, the verb would have been in the plural. So again, using the rules of grammar to understand the Torah well. So at any rate, he says leishto, which could mean for his wife or to his wife. The prefix lamed, le, is to or for, right? Normally. But here he says al ishto, concerning his wife, on his wife. Kamor, they inquired on his wife, about his wife, concerning his wife. And he gives example. There are other examples in the Torah in chapter 20, Imri li achihu. And it's so interesting that it's where Abraham is saying to Sarah, say literally to me, he is my brother, but what it's saying is say about me, right? Regarding me, on me, that he is my brother. So does that suggest that possibly this particular application of Hebrew has some contextual denotation? I'm not sure. It just occurs to me in looking at this Rashi that it might. It's a little bit suggestive. So I am going to. It's 8 o'clock here, so I'm going to stop here. But I think this is okay. We do have tomorrow, so we'll continue, God willing, tomorrow, and I'll put in the marking. Let's go back here. Let me see what I can do. If I can, no, okay. Give me a moment, please. Oh, there we are. Okay. So, and I'm going to stop well, I need to stop this first.
So explain Adonai Elohim.
Yes, okay. So the word Adonai, the I
Lord.
ending is also plural, right? So that's why it is.
Yeah.
It is. So the classic explanation is the royal we. I love to give the example of telling Queen Victoria a joke, and Queen Victoria would say to you,
we are not amused.
Correct. So that it's a way
and that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And
right.
it's used, so Elohim could be also the
Of
royal
course.
we, because we
Right.
are not
Right.
we.
Yes.
Right. It's not. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Adonai means my Lord.
Yeah, but
Adonai
literally,
means
yeah, but
the Lord of
Adonai.
wait a second.
or
No.
something like
Adonai
that.
would be singular.
Correct. It means our lords. It's plural. It's totally plural. Okay. So just to note that. Let me stop the share, and also stop.
Oh, what about with Lee? Could that just be about?
Yeah, about me. About me.
Okay.
but literally it's an unusual grammatical construction.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
want to just thank the people who have been following this recording, and we hope tomorrow to continue. Thank you.